Everything had happened too quickly. Second Lieutenant Avon, a recent graduate of military school, found his first mission unraveling faster than a plane with a failing engine. Following the fleet's victory in orbit, infantry forces had landed and swiftly crushed the remaining resistance. Exclusion zones were then established, some designated for military outposts, others for settlements. Reports indicated minimal uprisings, which was unsurprising, given that the fleet remained in orbit, ready to eliminate any sign of militia activity. A month after the planet's subjugation, Avon and his flight arrived. 12 days ago, they were ordered to secure the site for the new colony city. The designated hilltop was already abandoned, except for a few farming sheds. Located near a village at the northern base of the hill, the area had seemingly been used for grazing livestock. However, all animals had either been confiscated as military rations or hidden by the locals. Avon questioned the wisdom of this strategy, but command discouraged questioning, and he had ambitions beyond the rank of lieutenant. The forest south of the hill had been stripped of resources, and even the small lakes and ponds to the east and west were devoid of life. 2 days later, reinforcements arrived alongside construction workers, many of whom brought their families. Avon quickly realized they were not just workers but the first wave of settlers. His orders were clear. Their protection was the top priority. Concerned, he asked the captain of the first flight whether 36 soldiers were truly sufficient for defense. Given the likelihood of ambushes, it seemed like a dangerously low number. The captain dismissed his worries with a condescending response. "We're here to provide the illusion of safety, hatchling. We haven't faced resistance since crushing their army. Even when we entered the system, their ships were deemed to engage us. If you ask me, we're overstaffed for such an easy post." Unsatisfied, Avon turned to Vulcan, a veteran assigned to his command through his father's influence. Vulcan agreed with his concerns, and their flight remained vigilant in attitude that would prove to be their salvation when disaster struck 5 days later. As time passed, the first and second flights grew increasingly lax. Guard shifts were reduced to a single soldier, drinking became common, and weapons were often left behind while patrolling the village. Avon's flight, however, adhered strictly to protocol, enduring mockery from the others but holding firm to their discipline. "Every unnecessary day of preparation is training for the day it becomes necessary," his father had always said. On village patrol, Avon observed the humans thin, sickly, and lifeless. They moved sluggishly, quickening their pace only to shield their young from view. During one patrol, Vulcan discreetly handed his rations to a few human children, a strictly forbidden act that could have earned him an immediate execution. Avon, however, was too distracted by something else, an eerily empty stretch of road behind them. On the 5th day, Avon's flight was on duty protecting the settlers' homes. The second flight patrolled the village, while the first rested in the barracks. Then, it happened. The valley's broadcast towers crackled to life. Every Abraxian in the settlement froze in confusion as a voice rang out. "Citizens of the Terran Federation, we regret that we cannot yet come to your aid. The Lycan and Arcturus fleets have blocked our approach, and the Abraxians have shot down the crossed star vessels carrying your food supplies. We grieve for your suffering and the hunger you must endure until we arrive. Until we can free you from Abraxian oppression, we offer you only this solace: they are edible." It took Avon a moment to comprehend the meaning of those words. Had his translator malfunctioned? They couldn't possibly mean. The captain approached. "Lieutenant Avon, you're in charge of the outpost for now. I'm taking my flight to the village to ensure the humans don't get any foolish ideas and start digging up graves." "Sir, I'm not sure we should leave our position. The villagers might react violently." Avon started, only to be cut off. "Lieutenant, did they teach you nothing in the academy besides paranoia? I won't be questioned by a hatchling still wet from the egg, is that clear?" "Sir, yes, sir," Avon replied, though every instinct told him this was a grave mistake. As the captain and his half-drunken flight departed, Vulcan approached, looking grim. "What now, Lieutenant?" Avon took a deep breath. If he was wrong, command would punish him severely. But if he was right, "I want lookouts in every direction. Everyone else, help the settlers pack rations and essentials. Be ready to move on my command." Vulcan nodded and set to work. Avon retrieved his binoculars and headed to the northern checkpoint. From the hilltop, his worst fears were confirmed. The second flight stood in the village, encircled by descent snow, hundreds of humans, forming a dense ring around them. Through his lenses, he spotted the lieutenant of the second flight holding a human child hostage. his handgun aimed at the crowd. Then, a villager took a step forward. The lieutenant fired. Avon inhaled sharply as the human collapsed. For a brief moment, silence hung in the air. Then, a deafening roar erupted, and the mob surged forward, overwhelming the flight in a wave of bodies. Avon tore his gaze away from the massacre and searched for the first flight. They had just entered the village, unaware of the chaos that had unfolded moments earlier. To assert control, they fired a warning shot into the sky, intending to disperse the crowd. The humans turned to face them, and before the captain could utter even half of what was surely an arrogant command, the villagers charged. Gunfire rang out as several humans fell, but their sheer numbers made resistance futile. Avon watched in horror as a man reached the captain, seized him by the shoulder and head, and sank his teeth into his neck, ripping out a massive chunk. Chewing slowly, almost blissfully, he savored the flesh while the rest of the first flight was consumed in a frenzy. Avon swallowed hard, his focus locked on the man who had taken that first bite. His expression shifted at first. He seemed to relish the taste, eyes closed in pleasure. But then, his face soured. He opened his eyes, scanning his surroundings, and after a few moments, his gaze lifted to meet Avon's. A shudder ran through Avon. The human's deep blue eyes, once hollow with hunger, now burned with intensity, alive, aware, and ravenous. Then, slowly, he grinned, blood staining his teeth. Panic surged through Avon. He spun on his heel and sprinted back toward the settlement, barking orders into his comm to recall the lookouts. By the time he arrived, Vulcan had already gathered the settlers at the center of the settlement, their arms full of whatever supplies they could carry. Some murmured half-hearted complaints about being interrupted, but their unease was palpable. Avon took a deep breath. "My fellow people," he called out, silencing them instantly. "Listen carefully and remain calm." He let the tension settle before continuing. "The humans have just killed our patrol in the village. Every single one of them has taken up arms." Shock rippled through the adults, while their chicks only looked around in confusion. "My flight cannot defend this settlement against an attack, but we don't need to." The settlers erupted in protest, but Avon raised a hand, demanding silence. "Our orders were to protect you, not the settlement, and that's what we're going to do. I hope you've gathered everything you need, because we won't be returning until reinforcements arrive next week." "Where are we going?" one of the settlers asked. "Into the forest, south of here. There's a cave we found during initial surveys. It's well hidden, and we can all fit inside. Now move, we don't have much time." The soldiers guided the settlers toward the forest. Avon lingered, waiting until the last one crossed the southern checkpoint before following. Vulcan stood waiting. "When did you get word of reinforcements?" he asked. Avon scoffed. "I didn't. This is happening everywhere across this planet, probably across all 4 human colonies. Command has bigger problems than a single mining town, but they needed hope." Vulcan let out a dry chuckle. "I shouldn't have asked. I think I needed it too." They exchanged grim smiles and hurried after the group. Reaching the cave was uneventful, so uneventful, in fact, that they nearly missed it. Avon counted that as a good sign. If they struggled to find it, so would their enemies. Once inside, they set up a rudimentary camp bedding along the walls, a simple hearth at the center. Crude, but for now, it would do. 5 days later, Avon had grown to despise the cave, the captain, command, the gods, and anyone remotely responsible for this disaster. "Starve the population, what could possibly go wrong?" he muttered bitterly. "Oh, and of course we should send settlers before we've won the war. Better yet, let's send their families. Maybe we should station them next to the enemy. And sure, let's let the humans keep their broadcast system. Maybe they'll just surrender if we talk long enough. Why bother sending proper protection? Starving enemies are weak enemies after all." Each sarcastic remark was punctuated with an insult towards someone responsible. Then, sighing, he scanned the cave. They had rationed their food carefully, half a bar per person, a quarter for the chicks. His flight conserved energy by moving as little as possible, while the settlers busied themselves with distractions. Some listened as Vulcan recounted ancient legends, particularly for the chicks, who clung to every word. Avon had heard the current story at least 3 times now, but each time, at least one chick remained utterly entranced. Then something felt off. He glanced around, counted again. "Vulcan," he said slowly, "count the chicks." Vulcan's expression darkened as he did a quick tally. "One's missing. Panic crept into his voice. Instantly, Avon's flight was on their feet, weapons at the ready. "Four stay here and guard the cave. The rest, with me. Vulcan, you know the chick's best who's missing?" Avon was already outside when he finished speaking. "Garland, his favorite story is Spirit of the Lake," Vulcan said, his voice tight. "There's a small lake northeast of here. If he wandered off, that's where he'd be." Moving swiftly, wings tucked close to minimize drag, they reached the clearing in record time. Then Avon raised a claw. "Stop!" They had found Garland sitting at the lake's edge, chittering softly, repeating the myth's incantation. But they had found something else too. A human. He moved carefully, silently approaching the chick from behind. Avon's flight fanned out, ready to fire. If they shot him, the humans would know they were in the forest. If they didn't, Garland might die. The human stepped onto the clearing, mere feet from the chick. Avon's muscles tensed. He was about to give the order. Then he hesitated. The scene felt wrong, too familiar. It reminded him of the second flight, the way they had held the human young hostage. The human did something no one expected. "Hello, little one," he said gently. Garland startled, his wings flapping so hard he hovered briefly before landing again. The human's smiled lips closed, careful not to show his teat hand waved. The chick, not understanding the words but recognizing the gesture, waved back, albeit nervously. The human knelt, reaching behind his back. Avon's claw twitched, ready to give the order to fire. Then, "Don't," Vulcan hissed. Avon glanced at him, then back to the human who had pulled out an Abraxian military ration and held it toward Garland. The chick chirped excitedly, believing the spirit had answered his prayers. The human laughed a genuine, warm sound. And that's when Avon realized he had a translator. Avon signaled his flight to lower their weapons but remained cautious as he stepped forward. "Don't move, human." The man, who had been laughing moments ago, immediately stiffened. "Wouldn't dream of it," he replied carefully. "Garland, into the forest behind me, now." The chick hesitated before obeying, trudging past Avon, fully aware that he was in for a scolding later. The human exhaled. "Do you mind if I stand up? It's rather uncomfortable like this. Or at least let me sit properly." Avon tightened his grip on his rifle. "Fine, just no sudden movements." Slowly, the human rose and turned toward him. The moment Avon saw his eyes, recognition struck him like a thunderbolt. It was him, the man from 5 days ago, the one who had devoured the captain. His claws clenched the weapon tighter. Sensing the tension, the human slowly raised his hands. "Look, I know this may sound strange coming from me, but I don't mean you any harm." Avon kept his rifle trained on him. "Tell that to my captain's corpse." The human looked down, and the translator labeled his expression as regretful. "I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. I no longer mean you harm. I wasn't exactly sane back then." Avon swallowed hard, memories of that horrific day flashing through his mind. But after a long moment, he slowly lowered his weapon. "Fine, I'll take the risk and trust you, but my flight will be watching you closely." "Much obliged." They sat down on a fallen tree, the human's unsettling calmness, a stark contrast to the feral hunger Avon had seen in his eyes just days ago. "So," the man began, "I was actually here to check on an old cave that used to be a site of worship for one of our gods. I assume that's where you and your people have been staying?" Avon frowned. The human must have noticed because he raised a hand. "Relax. Since you're there, I don't need to go. Just listen, okay?" Avon sighed and gestured for him to continue. "All right. I suppose the best place to start is where we parted ways," the man said, making air quotes, though the translator didn't even bother translating the gesture. "After we regained some clarity, we raided your settlement, took all the rations you left behind and made soup. We also occupied your barracks as a makeshift hospital cleaner than our village, at least. After finally eating properly for the first time in..." He paused, then chuckled dryly. "About a month, we all just collapsed from exhaustion. The next day we realized something your ships were gone. Not a single Abraxian vessel remained in orbit." Avon felt a sinking weight in his chest. "That's when we understood the full extent of what we'd done," the human continued. "Some of us just shut down. Saturday there, unmoving for hours. Others started burying the dead humans and Abraxians alike, or at least what was left of the Abraxians." He winced at that last part. "The burial efforts took most of the day. The next, we took stock of who was still alive, who could still work. We knew our rations wouldn't last more than 2 weeks, so we sent out foraging teams. Avin interrupted. 2 weeks? How? We barely had enough supplies for 100 of our people, let alone your entire village. The human smiled as if explaining something obvious. Starve long enough, and your stomach shrinks. Eat too much, too fast, and you'll make yourself sick. So, we watered down the soup both to keep it digestible and to stretch it out longer. It made sense, but Avin couldn't shake the casual tone the human used when discussing their starvation. Did they already have another food source? He got his answer soon enough. The foraging teams didn't find much edible, the man admitted, but they did gather some medicinal plants, so at least we could treat the sick. Avin's stomach twisted, so that was a no. Then the human dropped a bombshell. Yesterday the fleet arrived. Avin narrowed his eyes. What fleet? The Terran fleet. All the feathers on Avin's body bristled. His claws curled so tightly they ached. They re-established supply lines, escorted cross-starships back to the planet. When we asked how they got past the blockade show they managed to come when the broadcast said they couldn't, their response was simple. The human's voice darkened. The signees of the predatory coalition and their fleets are no longer protected under the Geneva Convention. All color drained from Avin's face. He wasn't the only one. Behind him, one of his men muttered, "Oh fuck." He silently agreed. Everyone knew the Geneva Conventions. They outlawed the most horrific forms of warfare: bioweapons, nuclear strikes, gravity bombardments. If the entire Abraxian race had been removed from its protections, his home was now vulnerable to devastation on an unimaginable scale. The human's tone grew eerily neutral. Right now, hovering above this forest, is a Terran ground suppression frigate locked onto this location. And just beyond the tree line, an entire tank battalion, ready to level the area if I don't return in 3 hours. His next words were almost pleading. "I want you to surrender." Avin recoiled. "Are you insane?" He gestured wildly. "You just told us the conventions no longer protect us, and now you expect us to." "Number." The human's voice was sharp, but not aggressive. "The Geneva Convention only excludes the coalition military and their fleets. Civilians and private security forces are still protected." Avin blinked. "We're not a... You're a private security force contracted to protect the settlers of a civilian colony." The human locked eyes with him, his gaze full of something Avin hadn't seen in days. "Hope. Right?" Avin held his stare for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "That is correct. Our orders are to protect the settlers above all else." They left the forest together. The human gave a signal, and the Terran forces withdrew, leaving behind a parked crossed star vessel. Doctors rushed out immediately, checking everyone for injuries. Most had only minor scrapes, but little Garland sported a fresh bump on his head. Avin turned to the human, unable to hold back his question. "Why?" "Why what?" the man asked, confused. "Why give us this chance? Why risk your life for us?" The human glanced toward his village, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Your people never mocked us, and you looked the other way when they helped us. The children your friend gave rations to, they shared them. All of them survived. That means something to us humans." His gaze turned back to Avin, steady and unwavering. "Humans repay their debts." Avin exhaled, processing everything. Then, with renewed purpose, he extended his claw. Avin of Kor, second hatchling of Commander Sarian of Kor, leader of the Independent Council anti-pirate fleet. The human grasped his claw and shook it firmly. "Joseph Shore, mayor of Claytone Village. You might have heard of my big brother,